Nockie Palace just opened in December 2020. It's only a few months old, so yeah, I hope you enjoy the way walking in here with the garden outside and the ponds. And if you do not know Nockie Palace is owned by Michael Mack, who's an artist based in Hong Kong, and sadly that they're not here in the country. Otherwise, they would have loved to be here. And today we're doing an art and wine talk with Lucy Lawrence from Oran Wine and Ewan McLeod, a famous artist and significant artist of New Zealand and Australia. And
slightly below this.
So my name is Candice Chow. I'm a Somali wine consultant. I help restaurants to build the wine list and staff training. And I also do wine reviews and publish on Raymond Chen Wine Reviews. So I'll let Lucy introduce herself first.
So my name is Lucy Lawrence, and I'm the wine-based owner of Oran Wines. I'm originally from France, and I've been in New Zealand for about 17 years during the management. And so we have a sort of the Oran space just over.
And Ewan McLeod, painter, originally from New Zealand, now living in Sydney. So we moved over in 1980 over there, and but come back regularly to exhibit and to paint.
Yeah, great. So we are all tasting the 2019 Georgetown Pinot Noir Rosé, and I'll let Lucy talk about that a little bit.
So I didn't make this one, I make the current vintage now, the 21 is in my winery at the moment, but I can talk a bit about the style of this rosé. The vineyard for the grapes come from is just out of the gorge in Cromwell, and it's I guess a traditionally planted vineyard, very low, more Burgundian in its planting, low vines, close planted, and just across from the Bannockburn sub-region, across the river. And so it's the idea behind the rosé is they wanted something that was quite dry, very textural, and the way we achieve this in the winery is by having some aged in tank to keep the freshness and the lovely flavors and aromas, and some in barrels as well. So there is a bit of both. It's not quite half and half, but it's something like this. And so you get the best of both worlds, the texture and the aromas. So you end up with a rosé that's just so easy to drink, right? You guys have done, I'm sure. Super, really dry and very textural and very creamy, and so fresh and what we need for summer those last few autumn days.
And you know about the painting by John Burke. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's a really beautiful choice of label. John Pearce was an utterly wonderful artist in Australia, and he's never really got the recognition he deserves, I don't think. These paintings, this is one of the last he ever did. He died a couple of years ago, sadly, actually fighting a fire, a bushfire, and he rushed out and didn't come back, sadly. But I thought the word Lucy used of fresh would be, how I'd sum up the painting too, the sort of a crispness and a lightness and a freshness and a playful quality in that painting. It's just utterly beautiful. The original painting is quite huge. He never, as far as I know, he never came here. He never got to. Michael's been inviting over a lot of Australian artists. He also runs something called the Knock Art Foundation, and it's about promoting Australian art. And the sort of he has a residency program about linking the two countries, really, or bringing New Zealand artists over here. Also, Indonesian artists is one of the labels. But John probably was never made it, and I always used to tell Michael, well, you should buy some of John's paintings, and he'd go, yeah. And then he sort of clicked, somewhere along the line it clicked, and he's got some utterly amazing John Pearce paintings, really, really beautiful ones, including that, which, yeah, I think I would have loved to have seen John get here and what he would do with the place. But I think it's a lovely kind of idea of the two, linking the two, the wine and the label. It's pretty.
Absolutely, and the bottle as well.
Yeah.
Like you can see the painting design. So, what do you guys think about wine labels with an artwork on it? Is it helpful to the wine, or is it more helpful to the artist?
I don't use art online. Well, I used to use art online because we don't use would you like to see your art on the label? Is that helping you?
Yeah, well, personally, I do. I think it's a really lovely thing. I mean, there are a couple of labels. I mean, there's Lewin Estate. I think it's the famous one in Australia.
Mouton Rothschild had done it, so.
What's that?
Yeah.
Mouton Rothschild had done it.
Yeah, well, yeah. So which was where Lewin Estate was from.
Yeah, serious.
But it's a lovely thing, and they've got a big gallery there, and they've Margaret River, and they've got all their paintings on the walls, and they're quite exclusive paintings and exclusive wine. So there's a sort of a kind of a nice relationship they tease out between the two, which is pretty much what this talks about, really, is the relationship between the two and where it kind of ties together. But, you know, I thought it's kind of an interesting idea, isn't it? Who benefits? Does the artist benefit, or does the winemaker or the wine benefit? And I guess it's when you go into a salad door or a bottle shop, do you pick the one with the painting on it, or some people don't.
The produced one always. But like you talk about Mouton Rothschild, like you always see the label before anyone is tasting the wine. So I think it helps get the name out, and it helps each other.
But is there maybe a problem with branding where, you know, it's like a lot of the books and things, they always want the same look, so people recognise the actual place, don't they? And they go, oh yes, there's the blah blah. Whatever. So I don't know, maybe that counts against it. But that's what Karina and Michael are intending to do, that, aren't they? So that's the kind of intention. And partnership between art and wine, which is what we thought was kind of an interesting thing to tease out here and talk.
Yeah. When we think about appreciation of wine, it's pretty similar to when you're appreciating a wine painting, the artwork, and it's very personal feelings, and like it depending on your eyes and what you feel and what you think about it, and it's the same as the tasting. Can Lizzie talk about your style of winemaking and how it reflects in the wine?
I guess we're such a small estate, really, so we're able to do everything ourselves. My husband does the vines, I make the wines, and we have a very close relationship to our vines and to the wine we produce. So to me, it's where the emotion can come through. So I wouldn't call myself an artist at all, but I agree to have that conversation and maybe allow that word to come into my craft. But is it craft? Is it art? Where I see it as being artistic, maybe, is that I don't really think about the technical thing that I do to wine, because we actually do very little to wine. We actually make natural wines, but it's about how to put emotions through all the way from the vineyard to the bottle and trying to pass that on to our people that enjoy our wines. So maybe this is where art comes in, by not being too burdened by technicality and really much more about listening to the grapes and the wine and be clear in the bottle. So this is more that's my style of wine, I guess, like winemaking, purity, and so on.
Want to be showing the side.
Yes,
specialty.
yeah. It's not about making the best Pinot Noir in Central Otago, it's about making the best Pinot from the piece of land that I'm custodian of. This is what matters to me. If it's true, if you get to us from the truth, then it's when. This is what we're trying to achieve. So I guess this is where I love that word to come in, more craft maybe. That's what we do.
And how does that relate to you?
Oh, incredibly. I think that word emotion is amazing. I wouldn't have necessarily used that. I think it's, that's certainly the word more and more I find I'm using. I mean, when people ask you to describe your art, it's one of the hardest questions, can you sum yourself up in 5 minutes? It's really tricky, and you are, in a way, almost wanting to avoid being pigeonholed, because often people, they're trying to understand, they'll talk about painting what age, and if you say, well, I see myself as a blah, blah, they immediately, I've got you, know who you are now, and they stop thinking. So you want to keep that process going. But for me, emotion is, it's everything for me. And certainly in the visual art world, that's probably a bit of a rarity now, that a lot of work is, you can kind of divide it into head and heart. The conceptual work is very popular at the moment, with a huge sort of theory behind it and why you're doing it. And the actual work itself is often a bit empty, a bit like having water, and you read on the label that this is the most fantastic wine, and the flavours are so subtle that they're hardly detectable, but the astute taster will notice the mineral content or something or other. It's one of the old-fashioned ones, So, yeah, for me, it's all about emotion, and it's also about doing what you're good at. You have certain skills and certain abilities that I think you've got to stay true to, really. I can't imagine it's any different. But it's been my kind of understanding that winemakers are incredibly like painters. And there's a tendency for people to sort of see the visual arts as being creative, and especially painting. You're a real artist, and I do cringe a little bit about that. I like to call myself a painter rather than an artist. I think it's such a loaded term, an artist. I mean, anyone's an artist. Anyone's creativity. It's you can make paintings incredibly uncreatively. You could probably paint the same painting every day. You're a painter, but you're a pretty boring one.
I make that every
But you might do it very creatively. So yeah, I mean, it amazes me that you use that word, and I think, and I do get that sense of, you talk about your little bit of land, and in a way that's, the four sides of the canvas, and that's what you're mining. You're trying to get the most out of that. I really like the limitations of the edge, and what can you do with that? I mean, if you have a thing where you can do anything you like, it's like shit. And you can add anything in it. And so the actual traditions and the craft and everything have remained pretty similar. And in the visual arts, there is a little bit of an attempt at the craft, or that's a bit boring and been done before. But for me, I'm happy enough to plod away. I've certainly had a lot of people saying to me, how the hell did you stay a painter for all that long? You must have been. What did you do? How did you? Because the idea that you had to hide away, painting was so uncool. And gee, I suppose that's why one of the reasons I went to Sydney was more people, and you could literally hide away. It's pretty easy to be a painter, to remain a painter.
And just like you were saying before, like there's no limits with a canvas. Like for Lucy, that you from Burgundy, with lots of regulations and law within winemaking, you come to New Zealand, there is literally nothing really.
Freedom.
That is such a difference.
We put our own limitation. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We're still trying to achieve the best expression that we can. So we put our own limits. We're not going to do just anything. We're not, but it's ours.
Yes.
I think it's not someone giving it.
Yeah.
So how did you find having those restrictions over there? Were some of them useful?
In France? Some of them are useful, absolutely, just when it's taken too far, that there is a limit where it's constrained creativity. Some people are trying, especially young winemakers, I guess, trying to create new things and explore. Sometimes it's going back to old varieties and they're not enough, because there's not the one that's been chosen over the centuries. And so it just can kill creativity sometimes. And some people still do it, and they just choose to use appellation, but they do it. It's fine, just do. It's brave.
And as someone who makes wine and someone who paints, how do you market yourself and to get your name out?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question because it is very difficult. That I think, like winemakers, like painters, we're not good at marketing ourselves. Don't want to market ourselves. There's certainly in the art world there's been a move towards art schools talking more about promotion and self-promotion and how you fit into the art world and that was never taught when I was going to art school. And I was probably at the end of that area where artist work was about developing your own, finding your own voice and developing your own voice. And you'd take on a gallery and they would represent you and push you, and you would have total freedom within that. And I was incredibly lucky in Sydney in that I got a gallery, and his basic premise was he would take you on, and that was that. That was you were in the gallery. You were made. You didn't matter what you did, as long as you didn't cheat on your commission. As long as he got his commission, and there was a few other little rules about grape scissors and things you had to keep. He was a very interesting man, and he had a very determined idea of what it was. But his idea was the artist should work in the studio, slide your paintings under the door, and he would slide a check in under. And you had nothing to do with you didn't have anything to do with your market basically. And we wouldn't, people wouldn't even necessarily go to an opening. They'd just think, no, I don't want to go. People are boring. I don't want to have to talk to them. And of course, nowadays people want to talk to you. People want a bit of you, so they want to meet you. And I've certainly had a lot of experiences when I've met people and they kind of look very disappointed. they have an expectation of something else than what it should be like. And it's a kind of an awful thing where you're selling yourself. You're not just selling your wine or your painting. You're actually having to market. You're a kind of a personality. And it's unfortunate there's a lot of people who are very good at personalities, but they're terrible at making good paintings. That's shocking. But it's sort of secondary, And there's been a few people in Australia that are very interesting people for whatever reason, but their work should never get to the level it has, and that's kind of irksome, really. And so you do sort of think, well, how do I? Who do I get to do this for me? So you kind of, painters are quite lucky that if you can get a gallery to represent you, they do all that. And they do all the money side of it. If everybody try and do money stuff, I always underquote the price because I think, I can't tell them that. It's ridiculous. So I always underquote it. And of course, people will go to the gallery and say, he said this much. And the gallery will say, why did you say that? So stuff like that, it's not kind of who I am. So for me, it's quite nice that I don't have to do much of that stuff.
But you managed to do over 100 shows, showing your art and meeting people.
Well, you kind of, I quite like that. A lot of people won't let anyone else in their studio, but I actually do quite like it, and I don't mind doing this kind of thing. I enjoy it, and I actually enjoy talking about the process of painting, because I don't think people understand it, and I think there's been a kind of a bit of a move of making it a little bit obscure, making it a little bit elitist, and I think that's not helpful to anyone, really. Like winemaking, it is quite an elitist thing. It's we are dealing to people who have got money, let's face it, but it's not just about buying something, and it's also about appreciating something and liking something. So I kind of think that, I guess you could call it sort of educational side of things, is actually very, very important. And I've always found that people respond quite well to information, even though I probably hold to the fact that we shouldn't have to do that. I was reading about Ralph Oaktrey, who, famous New Zealand artist who died a while, and I think he only ever write one or two things about his work, which shocked me that he was able to do that. He couldn't get away with it, because it's been my understanding that you can't. You've got to, someone will say, "Oh, come and talk, or come and do this. Give a talk about this," and you think, "No, I don't want to do that." It's really hard to get away with it anymore. You're basically forced to do it.
And nowadays, with wine, everyone likes to be very transparent about how you make your wine, and they want to know everything about it. And how do you find that?
That's right, because it's nothing to hide. And the more they understand what goes through the process from the vineyard to the bottle, the more they will appreciate what goes. It's so much work that comes to a bottle of wine. So, it's really always fascinating when somebody spends a bit of time on the vineyard picking, or spends a bit of time on the estate. And I'm really that much work when you do this. Just think we're having long lunches and
That's right. Especially
it's not romantic at all.
Yeah, especially when you see social media that people only post nice pictures.
Yeah. Of
everyone smiling,
carrying moving a glass of wine. Yeah, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But we love it a little bit. That's not why we got into wine. But people think that's why we got into wine, because it looks really romantic. But it's nice to, being transparent, it's really nice to understand all of the steps, everything that goes into tending a vineyard, making a wine, and there's a lot of work, and that sort of justify why those wine lines are being, sort of prices, or why they are the way they are, and why they're not going to suit every palate. When they're not, I've accepted a long time ago that not everyone is going to like my wine. Because if they were, then they wouldn't be, they would be mainstream, and that's not what I do. So that's fine, as long as enough people do, because I can't drink them all. Then it's fine.
It's that kind of idea of it's an elitist thing we do. I mean, it's absolutely true that we're aiming to be better and better, as good as you can be, and that also means that the gallery that represents you are going to push your prices up higher and higher and higher, which makes it less and less accessible to people, and I find that a difficult thing, because if I do a work and I quite like it, but it's not quite at that level, what do? Do I say, "Oh, I'll make that one less money"? You can't. Yeah, you discount it, and someone will say, "Well, I really like that one. Why is it cheaper? Is that my taste is not very good?" And so it's literally, I have to put those ones away. They can't be seen, which is sort of sad in a way. I mean, it's a bit of a tricky one. It's just how the system works, and that you are pushing. You want to, every time you're in the studio, you're striving to do something better and better and new and different. And every now and then I'll go in there and I feel quite good, and I think, "Yeah, shit, man, I'm on fire today." And it's just it's trash. You just know it's trash. You've got that confidence, and you just, I always now I go, it's a worry. And often the work that's the best is this real struggle, with a lot of struggle behind it. And so it's it's not something you do for money. It's not a commercial thing. And with art, it has to become, there's a money becomes involved, and I always think it stuffs it up a little bit. It ruins the whole thing when it becomes commercial. But of course, it has to become commercial. You have to sell it. You want to sell it to keep going. I mean, I only became full-time painting, I don't know, 10 years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. When I gave up any other form of employment.
Aren't you doing a democratic thing through your prints? You're talking pension.
And
You're talking about you are making marks. You're making extremely well-informed marks. That can only be made through somebody that's been through this multiple lots of 10,000 hours. I think you went through the School of Art where you were informed about all the arts, right through from modern to contemporary, etc. And of course, we all feel that when we read slates, there's a skill level that needs to be appreciated. But in contemporary art, a lot of it is no longer valid. It's void of emotion, it's void of intellectual challenge, it doesn't soothe the viewer, it's hard to make sense. And even although a statement is being made, it's lost on people like me. And I think a lot of people like you through the gallery feel exactly the same. But of course, I can sing high praise on the glass of water. If my story is good enough, I can sell tons of bottles of water. But to go to the label too, it's two-dimensional. Humans work totally appreciated and sacred because I can see the validity of the marks. They're not random. A lot of mark making in younger people's work, it's not thought about. It's not become an intrinsic part of their bodies, their mind, etc.
or it's overthought. The mark is overthought where it's self-conscious and they're aware of a mark as a sort of a design feature. Yeah. So you're thinking, oh, that mark looks beautiful, that one's nice. Whereas actually the mark is about trying to kind of create, sculpt the landscape if you're doing that, or someone's face and trying to show the dimension, and you're actually trying to describe something in two dimensions, which is quite difficult. But I think it's actually what Chris is saying is very interesting about printmaking, because printmaking is a kind of a democratising of the visual arts, and it was sort of as a way of making it cheaper. But people have no idea of what goes into printmaking. It's phenomenal. And Lloyd Jones, the writer, we worked on a project together, and he came up to Townsville, and he actually worked on some of the plates, and these huge, big, massive steel plates, and he had his shirt off and he was grinding away. But I wished he had written something down, because he sort of got it. By doing it, he got it. And a lot of people think, oh, print, it's like a photographic print. Well, it's absolutely not like a photographic print. But how do you get that idea across? And I guess I was talking with Chris the other day, and he said he likes to talk to people in his gallery, which is in Cromwell. Are we allowed to advertise?
No, that's fine. We don't do websites, we don't do social media. We're totally entranced with the artists.
What you said the other day I thought was really lovely, that you said you'd like to be able to talk to people individually and explain it, tell them a little bit about it. And it's actually not about telling them, oh yes, this artist has won these awards and they've achieved this and they've done that. It's actually about describing the work, and that's the different. I think that's the different thing. And I'm sure it's the same with tasting the wine.
Yeah, it doesn't matter the pH and the never answer those questions. So that it's really what the process of it, what comes into it, the passion that comes into it, and the result. Does it resonate with you? Have you ever enjoyed drinking this wine? Oh, it's fine. It's good. It suits you. That's what matters. The emotion. That's all that matters.
And there's certainly no way you can have something that everyone likes. There's just no way. But I mean, maybe it's the same with you, but I kind of like it if they have it has an impact on them, whether it's positive or negative, And sometimes I get terribly negative responses to the work, but you actually think back on it later and you think, yeah, that touched them in some way. I had a woman that came in and she said to me, here your paintings are about your father. These paintings were about Gallipoli, like that one there. So you've got a skeleton and a person walking away. You know, I don't know if that painting was in the show, but they were like that. They weren't like paintings. And she said, my husband died of Alzheimer's and I got over it. When are you going to get over it? And you kind of think, oh, but then I saw later and I thought, well, actually, she hasn't got over it. And the paintings have touched it. You know, is that a good thing to open up those wounds? I don't know. But, you know, she had a very strong response. And also a lot of people just look at things in a different way. They don't, you know, emotion in the visual arts has been pretty much out for a long time. You know, irony's in and being a smart ass and, you know, being cool and all that. And it's just not me. You know, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it if I tried. I'd be terrible at it. So you sort of do what you've got to do. And
It's true to do that.
yeah. But what I was saying before is like, I don't think it's 20 years ago that I gave up my teaching, but, you know, was it? Oh, Ian's saying, I don't know. Well, maybe it's 20 years ago. But anyway, I had to work. I had a full-time job in a festival, and you know, it was so it's not easy. You get a real job as well. And I did do a bit of teaching for a while, which was lovely. But yeah, I mean, all of those things. You're not doing it for the ritzy lifestyle. You are doing it for the lifestyle. You're doing it because you love it. You're passionate about it. You enjoy it. Yes, that's the thing.
Well, now everyone has got the red wine, right? So this is the Nockies palette, Georgetown 2017 Pinot Noir, which is the name.
Yeah, I did make this one. I haven't tried it for many years, so I'm very pleased to try it. So it comes from the same vineyard, and it's made of 3 parts. I was picked in 3 different days, going to 3 different tanks, and we did we sort of tease the grapes out in different ways in all those 3 tanks. So and the idea again is to layer what we were saying with I was saying about the rosé before is layering the wine in different ways. So one way to explain what we did to those tanks, but all 3 were, some were more about aromas and some were more about texture, and so it was exactly the same as this actually. And then when it's blended back together and then aged, that's where all those layers are allowed to show. 17 was a lovely, sort of a cooler vintage, so and often those wines are the one that comes out. They may take longer to show themselves, but in the long run, they're very rewarding because they're more delicate. They just age better if you do them. So I find the older vintage more rewarding in the long run. But yes, I'm very pleased to look at it. A few years down the track, things age really nicely actually.
So how does that location compare to your? Because it's only a couple of kilometres
but
away.
It's so much different.
It's different, yeah.
We pick 2 to 3 weeks earlier. This one. It's a hotter spot, and also the fact that this vineyard is a different type of planting, it changes a lot. So yeah, they pick. It's one of the first vineyards to pick in the gorge, not just in the Cornwall Basin. So, but even if we look at Wooingtree and us, which are 500 meters apart, we pick 2 weeks apart. So there's so much going on in terms of microclimate and the way you choose to grow your grapes and the crop level you carry, and we can have so much difference in such a small distances. But if we're looking in a more micro way on our vineyard, I make 4 different Pinot Noir from this 4 hectare vineyard. I make 4 different Pinot from the 4 different blocks that I've selected in amongst those wines. They're side by side. But this is what Pinot does, that ability to really sort of pick up on those small variations, the subtlety of the land and the microclimate and the clones and all the things, and amplifying them through the wine. And this is what Pinot is good at doing. So I find that looking at single vineyard wine, single block wine, it's the way Pinot Noir is really the way to go. So the most true way to look at Pinot Noir, because it has that ability. So it's right. It's embrace it rather than making blends of things that come from lots of different ways. It's not, the story is not told the way it should be told. I come from Burgundy. That's what we do there. So that's what's been drilled into me all my life. It's how it's what should be.
I just wondered if either of you have a concern about plagiarism, because if you're so transparent in your winemaking process, can somebody copy your wine, or even within a hectare, if the conditions are so unique, you cannot be copied? And then with
only me is that vineyard.
What's that?
Only me has that vineyard.
Yeah.
No one can
you
make
can't copy your own wine from year to year.
Oh yeah. No one can make a wine from only me on that piece of land. So no one can make a wine like mine. So it doesn't matter if I tell them that I've punched down a tank 10 times or done this. You can't. This is not where the wine. This is not what matters about the wine or what it tastes or feel. At the end, it's not. It's really the sense of place. So no one has that but me. So this is where we can't.
Art's exactly the same.
Yeah.
You can teach art to many different people, the same processes you're doing. They'll do them in completely a different way. So you've never got the idea. Yes, they can plagiarise your ideas, but they'll do it totally in a totally different way. It's never, they can't own your work.
Sadly, in Australia at the moment, there is a lot of plagiarism happening. And, I mean, it's the difference between being influenced by people and actually copying someone's idea. And, I mean, everybody, all visual artists are influenced by other artists. But the tendency in the past was to be influenced by people from, like quite a while ago. But now there are quite a lot of younger artists that are actually just copying other artists, and it's quite worrying actually, because it's worrying because they're allowed to get away with it. No one calls it out and just says, hey, that. I have no problem with people using other people's work as a way of learning about painting, like painting an innuendo or doing just a copy, just to try and understand the work. But if you're trying to exhibit that work, that's, to me, a bridge too far, because you're basically saying this is your own work, and a lot of times it's not. And I kind of can't work that out. I've been quite lucky that not many people have copied mine. I think they're probably looking at it going, who would want to copy that? But the other thing is actually it's a lot harder to do than it looks. It might look quite easy, but it's actually not that easy to paint the way I paint, and I paint very much in the way it's like my handwriting in a way. So it's harder to copy, and probably there's a sort of flower thing that's been going on, and everyone's doing flowers, but a lot of the work is so kind of empty, and it's being sold for a lot of money, and I just think, whoa, what's going on here? Why are people paying that kind of money for that? What is going on? And I suppose that a lot of it is this thing of marketing, and often what seems to happen is people are marketed on promise. They're the new artist, and buy this while you can. And so you can get quite good money, and then as soon as they get to a certain stage, the gallery will just ditch them and get another new one, and they work their way up and ditch them and get another one. And there's always lots of people waiting to get there, but none of the galleries now, and I don't know quite why this is, I think it's probably market, the money, the cost of rents, the overheads and everything, but they're not putting the time and energy into people to nurture them and to keep them working. There's a pressure on them from a really early age, like push the hell out of them, and one or two will make it. One or two of them are strong enough to get over that hump, but it's a terrible, terrible trend. And I also think, this is my bugbear time, but my other one is there's a lot of older artists in Australia, a lot of friends, and they're in their late 80s, 90s, one just turned 100, still doing the most remarkable paintings. A couple of them have come here on this on the Knock Art Foundation, and wonderful, wonderful artists, but they had real difficulty selling their work at kind of what it's worth, because it's almost priced out of the market, and people would prefer to pay a bit less for a promising artist, and it just seems weird to me. I don't know quite what goes on there, but, I don't know. I'm sure the same happens with wine.
I think it sounds like craft beer.
Craft beer.
Craft beer, that it comes out a new can, a new design and marketing, this is a new style, and then very quickly a new batch came, and then they would discontinue the idea, and they use fresh hop, and it's sort of like, it gives you quite an immediate flavor, and like you can't really replicate it. So then you put it on one design label, and then when you sell out, and then like you push out a new one, and people don't actually go back to buy the one that you've drunk already, because I'm like that. I'll go to try the new ones, and then you just like that's sort of like a train that you just keep finding new ones.
For a novelty.
Yeah, and
It's a little bit harder to do that with wine because we only get one chance a year to make wine.
That's
Even
right.
in a long 50 years career, we only made 50 vintage. It's not actually, so it's quite hard to do that in wine. There is always special wines, of course, but it's great, well packaged.
but people has changed a lot, like how you say marketing, paintings, and like it's about everything. It's almost about every product now. That like it depends on how it's marketed, how it's got to you, that you think that is suitable, and then or it's trendy now that I want to get it, and that sort of works with artists in that way, that like this person's work suddenly selling a lot, like he must be popular, and then for whatever reason that it makes it popular, that everyone wants to get it, and then another one comes up. Then
Well, that's fashion, isn't it? The nature of fashion, and I think that's right. And I think to a large extent, I've always worked outside of fashion. I've never been super fashionable. When I was at, well, no, I haven't really, because when I was at art school, painting died. Painting died when I was there, and then that was in New Zealand that died, so it already died many years ago before. And it's always been a bit uncool, and what I've done has always been a bit uncool. I've done very well, but sort of out of fashion, which means, because of course if you're in fashion, the next thing is down. And there's always a lot of people that are quite looking forward to watching you, on the way down. Tumble can be quite vicious. But, so I feel very pleased, and I think I was able to do it in Australia. I don't think I could have done it here, where I just found my own little niche, and it's Sydney's just that little bit bigger, where you've got a few people that even they'll continue, they continue to buy painting. There were galleries that continued to exhibit paintings, even though it was uncool. They still did it, and there was a lot of collectors who bought my work, depending, and so I was very lucky in that way. But the whole fashion thing, I think, is really difficult. It's a really hard one to negotiate, because, in a way, it's kind of nice to be outside of it a little bit, at least.
I think that there's a whole group of people who realise that it's very cool to be uncool.
Yeah, but maybe as you get older, that happens, doesn't it?
I think uncool also has another name called classic.
Well, isn't it, if you think about our two-dimensional painting, prints, or whatever, you think about wine. Sometimes, to most people, it's an elusive quality. If I were to get up, and if you were a grand piano, and I've never played piano, but I started banging away on the keyboard, and then I would then declare that I've just been taught by the biggest minds and musicians, I'd get laughed out of the room. And I think the problem is with music, and to some extent, the majority of people can actually have a strong opinion. It goes right back to what they listened to when they were young, and what's been regarded as up there and all that sort of thing. But not many people can actually look and measure humans' paintings and draw out the quality and the experience and all that's gone through. And this is where I think it is very difficult for my generation not to accept contemporary art. Quite the opposite. Because one's got to keep one's mind open. You don't have any choice. Well, you have a choice, but I'd rather keep it open. And you always evaluate things.
Yeah.
But it is sad when the market is flooded and art is too big a commodity because somebody woke up one morning and said, I'm going to be an artist. And I'm good at social media. I'm going to be an influencer.
And that's happening a lot more, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I don't think that people necessarily need to be able to have an intellectual discourse with what I do. I'd rather people just go, they love it, they don't love it. Luckily enough, the kind of work I've always done has a figurative element, so people haven't. It's accessible. They don't. A lot of abstract artists, which is incredibly beautiful, like John Keir, for example. He was so good that he would bamboozle people. People would come into the gallery and you'd see them, and I look at some of his paintings. I'm lucky to live with a few, and I just look at them every morning and find different things in them, and they grow and grow and grow. But the first vision can often be absolutely, totally discordant. People go, "Whoa, what the hell is this?" And then so you have to. How do you get into it? Like Mike initially liked him, but now he's grown to just utterly love something. Once you start loving them, you appreciate what the person does and all that. And so I always feel lucky that the figuration, people get that pretty quickly. But then, do they have to have a kind of an understanding of the mechanics of what I do? Probably not. And it's the same with the wine, I think. I mean, if someone said to me, can you describe that wine? Excuse myself to go to the toilet.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I find that the most boring thing.
But I think the sad thing, and what Chris is alluding to, is that basically the general population have never had much of an education in the visual arts. And I think when I was at school, it was, you were good at art if you could do it. And it wasn't about necessarily appreciating it or being able to look at it, or just a few inroads into, what's this person doing and what are they looking at. The kind of work I like now, I hated when I was young. I used to think it was just stupid, and childish. And now, of course, that's what I love. But it's Chris's analogy with the grand piano. I think so many artists are doing it, or so many people are doing it. And there's an artist in Sydney who does bad art. When you do it's really clumsy and childish and bright colours, and I just see it in the gallery, and I just think, do we really have to be bothered with that? It's also ironic and clever, and so I just think, life's too short for that. It's just too dull.
One big difference is the internet in the last 5 to 10 years now means every artist knows everything going on around the world at every second. And before you had to get on a boat for 2 months and go to Los Angeles, and then you'd look at someone who died 50 years before you, and then you'd come back on the boat and you'd be full of motivation. Now it's like an overwhelming influence, I think, for younger artists, because you can't concentrate on any one thing. It's bombarded into your daily life.
It's Instagram.
Yeah, algorithms just pumping anything to do with social media. You're just going to be seeing a million different paintings a day. And I'm doing this one now, I'm doing this one now, I'm doing that one.
But the irony is they aren't seeing a million paintings.
They're seeing this tiny JPEG. Yeah.
You don't kind of get it.
No, you've got to stand in front of it.
I don't think my stuff reproduces very well. And, I don't know if you've had an experience overseas with looking at some, like El Greco or some paintings like that, and in a reproduction they just look weird. It looks really nutty, but when you see them in real life, you think, shit, they have a quality that's just sort of transcendental. So I kind of think that's what gives me faith about the future, is I think touch and taste and our senses are more and more necessary, you know. And I kind of think people keep sort of saying, oh, digital art and everything, you know, art's finished. But like art, books are not finished, you know, there's still bookshops is just coming back and beautiful coffee table books and everything.
Yeah, you have to stand in front of a painting. That's what it's
you do, don't you?
Yeah.
You can. So, but you know, I mean, obviously for younger people, it's bloody difficult, and a lot of that education now is about a career and how do you slot into that career, and a lot of people now go into a thing and they'll say, "Oh, I want to be an artist. But, you know, what's making the most money? Which area should I get into?" And all that's looking pretty good. And you'll have one or two that are groovy and cool, and they're leading it. But you know, basically, if you really want to be one of the trendsetters, you do something totally different. And the irony being, when you go to art school and they're making you do stuff that's like what's cool, they're actually better to make you do something that's totally different, because they're the people that are probably going to break ground and see things in a different way. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? There's too many images, and
it's about a clarity of language, really. I mean, a painting has a visual language, and quite frankly, I have a problem where you actually have to describe what your painting is about when you present it, because it should speak with, if it's well done, it should speak without an explanation, if that makes sense. And which goes back to your emotion thing. And it's the same with wine. You know, do you really need the blurb on the back of which bottle which says this was picked on the left side? Yes. Once you negate that, then the product itself should stand alone. Or, you know, I say the product, whether it's be wine or whether it be painting or whether it be a print. And, you know, all of a sudden, that's where it has depth and it has meaning. And when you're actually reproducing an image, it doesn't.
Although sometimes the essay is more exciting.
Well, often it is, yeah, but that's the sad thing, isn't it? Because it's supposed to be a visual medium, so obviously, isn't it? You know, some of it's very clever and witty, but you know, generally, very conceptual work still has a beautiful presence. You know, it doesn't have to be one or the other. And to a large extent, I guess my issue with things is, the medium doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's painting or if it's digital or performance, or it's what you do with that. You know, it's ultimately what you do with it. And the art world has been obsessed with particular forms are better than other forms. So if you paint, it's old-fashioned. So you just, you know, we're not going to have a competition that's old-fashioned. We're going to have video, or we're going to have that, you know, that kind of thing. And we were sort of talking about historically. Certain grapes, you know, are unfashionable, and you know, we don't drink that. You know, and it's sort of a kind of a weird one, isn't it? You know, similar kind of thing.
Talk about like wine appreciation. Like we go and learn how to appreciate wine. Like you look at the colours, and then you can tell some detail about it. Is it old, or is it young, or is it faulty? And then you go and smell that. Then you go to taste it and see how it feels on your palate. Not to just get the weight and not just the flavour, it's the weight and texture before you actually drink it. So in terms of painting, how would you go about enjoying a painting to appreciate it?
Well, visually, I suppose, and immediately is just, you know, for me it's that sort of warmth.
Yeah.
You know, you see something that's exciting, excites you in some way.
But Ewan, isn't art like wine? That with wine, if you taste a lot of wine, you give that shading to how you enjoy it. And isn't it the same with art? When you look at a lot of different art, even art you really don't like, it kind of sharpens the way that you then look at the next piece.
Yeah.
I'd love to have that knowledge about wine. I would really like to. I've often thought, I should do that. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to change the fact that I'll go, oh, I like that. And probably I can describe why I like that and why not. And,
But there's an analytical aspect of wine appreciation or art appreciation, which is nice to know. It's knowledge. But then there is just a pure emotion, raw emotion. So having a picture, a PDF of an art and being able to say, oh, the artist did this, put this there, and the composition is this way. Same with the wine I get with this and with that. And then you walk into the room of a museum and walking further, making all that sculpture. I had that experience with in Auckland, they had the Kiss was there in all this marble glory. Seen it 100 times on TV. Beautiful. I walked in that room, I cried. It's not the same thing. It's all of a sudden I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I've seen that artwork a million times. So it's beautiful. You walk in the room and, oh my Lord, is it beautiful? It's more than beautiful, it's everything. And I guess with wine, it's the same thing. You can analytically say, this happened, this analytical. And you can just have a lovely glass of wine and just let yourself be taken. Just happy to be there with your friends. That lovely food. That's what I go to England.
I think Franny's the same. I mean, the difficulty is I don't think could you read about tasting wine, and that would be pretty frustrating, wouldn't it? Not drinking.
No.
We have this thing now where people will look at the show online and say, I saw your show, and they saw it online. Well, it's not the same. I mean, I used to think, how the hell would someone buy a work online? How would they do that? But now it's quite normal, and I still think, well, I suppose if you know the artist and you know their work, and everyone's time poor, they can't get into the galleries, and a lot of galleries are becoming tiny little places, and everything's done online, everything's sold online, and that's sort of weird. But I guess if people know the artist, they kind of know the kind of work they do, and they can imagine it, fill in the gaps. But it isn't the same experience. And I think ultimately people go with their gut, I mean, that sort of thing of buying what you like. You buy what you like, maybe that changes over the years, but that's ultimately, if you're going to buy as an investment, you're buying something you can't stand, if someone says, oh, buy that artist, their work's going to just go off the roof. Well, you're going to look at it every time you're looking at it and wonder how much it's worth now, when it's going up, But if you buy something you really love, at the end of the day, who cares, You go to sell it and someone says, oh, no, sorry, I'm not going to give you anything for that, it's rubbish. But you've enjoyed it, you've loved it. And who knows, maybe it will be worth some money in the future. But, it's interesting with someone like McCann, where the prices are just stratospheric now. I saw a little one like that size went for $90,000, I think, the little painting that size. Well, in the 80s, I remember people were just so scathing of McCann. He was sort of ridiculed, and the poor guy was sort of like, he was just a butt of jokes. I mean, it's just in the most terrible way. And it was often the same kind of people that are now buying their paintings that were kind of saying, oh, it's shit, I know, I remember having argument after argument with people, and they'll say, oh, he's having you on, it's just a joke. And you think, why the fuck would you spend your life having a joke? Just to make you, fooled you, I'm not really that good. Why would you bother? I never understand that, why people would think that. And that was one thing I liked about Australia, where maybe they didn't understand it, but they'd give it the benefit of the doubt in a funny kind of way. And New Zealand was this real, he's not real. And it's you sort of think, I mean, the poor guy, he died a pretty bloody miserable death. I remember someone said they went and saw him and he was pretty sick, and all the paintings are leaned up against the wall and no one wants them, and now people are just clamouring for them and buying any sort of piece of shit that he had lying around. Sorry, Mike, as I drink this wine, that's sort of
That's number 2.
Right, I think that's all where we wrapping it up, and
we're going to wrap it up with my spirit.
The label on the bottom of wine that we're just drinking, the art on the label.
That's
Yeah, Yes, Chris O'Doherty, or regional ambassador, he's quite a famous musician in Australia. He was a band called Mental as Anything. He's actually a New Zealander as well, from Auckland originally. And the little houses in the background are sort of represent steakhouses where his father built, I think. And you can sort of see it's a very New Zealand label with the sheep hill and everything. But yeah, he's a very lovely guy. And there's a couple of his, I think, a couple of labels of his.
Yeah, so our Pinot Noir 16, 17 and 18 vintages are all Reginald Masters artwork, just different pieces. So you can have a look around. And it's quite iconic. You can kind of see his sides.
And he's been to the Chivney residency 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
But I love it. Yeah.
And then following, we will have some music for an hour.
Yeah. So the band is just outside, so yeah.
And we can hang around, and if you want to talk to you a little bit more, yeah, just hang around and chat. Thank you so much, Lacey, Cameron, given being here.
Thanks for coming.
Yes.